Oh my goodness. Sarah, it's like we haven't seen you in a week.
I'm back.
You're back. Mom and I were actually discussing it today. I'm like, I feel like Sarah's done like a majority of the episodes on this podcast. Mom's like, just name her as your co-host already.
As your co-host.
Oh my goodness. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I probably could at this point be like, okay, it's
Oh,
Sarah.
nice.
And then I just have guests once in a great while.
I thought we had more people that we were rotating through.
We were, but people get busy. And then I
I
get
guess
busy.
so, yeah.
And then I procrastinate on shit. And yeah, I'll be honest, shit doesn't get done right away. It's like trying to get that nice mellow groove going. And then there's other cases like the one that I was going to cover today that's now getting pushed off to next week because the 2020 episode for this case is like watching Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. I don't understand why they're jumping from like present to past, present to past, present to past, all the way through it. And it's driving me fucking crazy. But anyway, in other news, as Sarah's playing with her light in the background, I'm just watching her
I
hand turn
am.
blue. I'm like, she got some Agatha powers going over there. You good?
Yeah.
It does look
It's all my
really
mana.
mystical. It does look
I
very
finally
mystical.
charged up enough to do this. No.
You're like, I finally have gotten here. The world will bow before me.
Not the world. Just all the turtles so we can go back to having normal straws. No, I'm kidding.
Just the turtles, so we can go back to having normal
Just the
straws.
turtles. You will not feel hungry when you see plastic.
You will not be like, that looks tasty. Maybe I should eat it. Is that a worm? No, it's plastic.
Turtles.
Poor turtles.
Oh,
Oh my
you think you're
goodness.
getting a snack and you're just like, oh god, McDonald's straw.
It doesn't even taste like the the old ones do. Oh my goodness. Well, I went to Batesville this morning and got a gym membership, so stay tuned on that. But the takeaway from this is that I made that guy laugh for quite a bit of time, and then he's like, let's take your picture. And I fucking went, okay, I'll do a big smile. I wasn't sure when he was gonna take it, and I like bit my lip. So I look like the meme of the Tyrannosaurus Rex in my ID photo for the gym.
Perfect.
I'm like, yeah,
You're just like,
that checks out. The funny thing is that I was telling him about my ID over in Utah when I was living over there because they made me look like fucking Skrillex. I was like, God damn it.
they're like, do something with your hair. And you're like, okay.
Okay. And they're like, pull your hair behind your ear. I think that'll look really good for you. And I'm like, I looked at that photo and I went, oh my God, I look like Skrillex. This is so insulting. And they're like, no retakes. That's it. You got to live with it. I'm like, okay. I don't even look like myself here. And then you get all self-conscious and you're like, is this how I really look? Oh no.
Is this my face?
Is this my face?
That's how I feel about my driver's license photo.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't let me retake it the last time. They're like, you need a new ID. I was like, okay. No new photo, but I'm like heavier, like at least 50 pounds heavier, and I have a mohawk.
Oh God. You're like, yeah.
And I was like,
here I am.
I don't even look like that anymore. Like I look like I'm fucking 14 anyway. Like they think it's a fake no matter what I do. I might as well just look like my picture.
I actually had somebody that like looked at my ID the other day and kind of like looked at me like, I'm like, I'm about to be a 30-year-old woman. I don't need this.
I don't need this.
I don't need this. I've seen things that would curl even your tongue, boy.
Even your tongue, boy.
Back in my day, the cartoons weren't CGI.
The cartoons weren't written by AI. It was just regular bad writing.
It was just regular bad writing that people worked their asses off for. Let me just age myself real quick. Courage the Cowardly Dog show was something that came out when I was a little kid. Oh
That was a
gosh.
good one though, as far as
You know what?
cartoon horror goes.
I blame it for most of my fucking problems nowadays. Like looking back at that show and watching it as like an adult of just like having background noise when I'm trying to go to sleep. I couldn't sleep when that show was on. I'm like, God damn, this is terrifying.
It's really scary.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But anyways, Sarah, is there anything new going on with you?
No, I'm still recovering from my skateboard crash, so
That's fair.
I
I took a
still.
tumble. I actually matched up with you. I took a tumble out of my car at Walmart. And it was like one of those
Oh,
things that I like did a break fall and hit the pavement against my wrist, which I'm pretty sure has been broken in the past, but I did nothing to get it fixed when I was little. I just
yay!
kind of went, "Oh, I'm gonna go home now," and didn't tell mom what was happening. And then she's like, "What happened to your arm? It's all bruised." I'm like, "I skateboarded with Heelys. It was a horrible idea."
A great idea. I
It
know what
was
you're talking about.
an absolutely terrible idea, but no, I fucking slammed my wrist against the pavement, and I like the first thing I did is when I got up, I like did the like meerkat check to see if anyone had seen me fall. And once I was satisfied that nobody had seen me fall, like had fallen, I like bent back into my car and like did a like held my wrist for a moment.
Oh no!
I'm like, oh God, please don't be
Like,
broken.
please. That's the feeling. I'm like, well, although where my bruise is, it's completely numb, so I've been poking it because I can't feel it. I just feel the skin around it moving.
I understand that though. I'm like, I got a bruise on the side of the foot that my dad yanked back into place the other day. And I'm like, I'm poking at it because I'm like, oh, is it gonna hurt? I'm not a masochist. I'm just curious, but I'm like, is it gonna hurt? And it doesn't have any feeling there. I was just like, oh, oh.
Nerve day. Like, what an interesting feeling.
What an interesting concept. Nerve damage. It's probably because I've broken both of my feet, like terribly. So may they rest in peace. Anyways, though, I do like your checkered pajamas. They look very cozy.
Yeah. They're cotton. 100%.
100% cotton. Anyways, Sarah, are you ready for a little bit of a holiday episode? Because it's the only one that I still have on my roster from the previous podcast that we haven't done yet.
Which holiday?
Uh, Santa. Santa Claus.
Oh, Christ Mass.
Christmas.
The
Anyways.
Christ Mass.
Anyways. So before we get started today, while we understand that some individuals listen for the entertainment aspect of true crime, it's important to remember that these are real people with families and friends who may still be suffering from their loss. These stories are not meant to open old wounds or cause further emotional damage to those involved. We remind you, please be respectful and do not dox or contact those involved with cases. The case discussed in this podcast today may be disturbing to some audience members, and listener discretion is advised. Trigger warnings for today's episode is that this is a minor or child involved case. So if you're not ready to listen to that, we'll see you next week. But if you are, let's go ahead and get started. So on Christmas Eve of 1945, many families were preparing for the upcoming day. Children, no doubt, were staying up late to catch a glimpse of the legendary Santa Claus, or perhaps to open the first present at midnight. This was no different for the Sodder family. Now, the family itself consists of 12 individuals: George Sr. and Jeannie Sr., and George Sodder was born Giorgio Sodder in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. And he immigrated to the United States in 1908 when he was 13 years old. He and an older brother had basically accompanied him to Ellis Island, but his brother returned to Italy shortly after arriving, leaving George to fend for himself and be on his own.
Wild.
Right? I'm like, You're 13. Go figure it out. You're good. I'm like, God
Let's
damn.
go figure it out. No, I don't know. I'm not Italian.
I'm not Italian either. I don't even know what you would do. Like, what do you do if like somebody's just like, oh, we're just gonna go over to Ellis Island. We're gonna go to America, and they're like, I don't feel this anymore. Bye. What?
Yeah, well, child labor was, I'm sure, legal back in the day.
Oh,
So
definitely. So it's not
yeah,
like he
he's
wouldn't have a
13. He's a
job or
man.
anything. He has work.
Oh yeah. Plus, you're 13. Your body is more moldable. You can do all the crazy stuff that older people can't.
Additionally, you have to think about like how OSHA really isn't a thing yet. The FDA isn't really a thing yet. So it's really just kind of a you do what you do and you do what you can. You might get killed on the job, you might not. Some of
You
you
might
may
not.
die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make. That's
The
how
name of
things
the
went.
game.
So George Sr. found work on the Pennsylvania railroads carrying water and supplies for laborers, and after a few years he moved to Smithers, West Virginia, where he launched his own trucking company, a hauling dirt type of company for construction, and later freight and coal would be hauled with this trucking company. Now, he met Jeannie Cipriani, who had come over from Italy when she was just 3 years old. And she worked at a local store called the Music Box, which her father owned and operated. The two quickly fell in love, got married, and had 10 children between the years of 1923 and 1943, settling their family in Fayetteville, West Virginia, an Appalachian town with a small but very active Italian community. So the children are as followed: John, who is 23 years old, Joseph, or Joe, who's 21, and he was working in the United States military army like branch, and he was away during this holiday season in 1945. Marianne, who's 17, George Jr., who is 16, Maurice, who is 14, Martha Lee, who is 12, Luis, or Louis, who is 10, Jeannie Jr., who is 8, Betty, who is 5, and Sylvia, who is 2. And I did say Luis or Louis because I might bounce back and forth between them. I'm really used to seeing this name as pronounced as Luis, so my apologies ahead of time. So the oldest sister is 17-year-old Marianne, who had been working at a dime store nearby for basically gaining a little bit of money to give her fellow siblings new toys for the holiday. Three of the sisters, Martha, Jeannie, and Betty, as well as the two brothers, Maurice and Luis, ultimately didn't want to go to bed this Christmas Eve. Like, they're excited, they're staying up. And in fact, they begged their mother, Jeannie Senior Sodder, to stay up just a little bit longer to play with their new toys when it was already 10 p.m. The two oldest boys who were home for the holidays, John and George Jr., were already in the attic and in bed. They'd had a hard work day with their father, George Sodder Sr., who ran, like I said, a small trucking business just outside of the family's home in Fayetteville. Jeannie Sr. told her children goodnight, scooped up baby Sylvia, and they went to bed. Jeannie Sr. woke up shortly after midnight when the phone rang downstairs in the office, and she answered it to a woman who asked for an unknown name at the residence. There was the sound of clinking glasses and laughter filling the background of this call as well, so it can be presumed that this person was probably at like a Christmas party or something like that and was trying to reach somebody, obviously. So Jeannie Sr. told the woman she had the wrong number and didn't think too much of it before going back to bed. The house was quiet at the time, and Marianne had actually fallen asleep on the couch. And Jeannie Sr. noticed that the doors and windows, curtains, things that typically you shut after dark are still unlocked. Now, typically the children were in charge of securing the house before turning into bed, but for some reason, they didn't tonight. Jeannie Sr. didn't think much of it. She just simply locked up, closed the shades, and too went back to bed. She presumed that the rest of her children had gone to sleep at some point or retreated to their bedrooms upstairs. About 30 minutes later, Jeannie Sr. was awoken again to the sound of something thumping against the roof, and she waited a moment to listen to see if it would happen again. When it didn't return, she just kind of rolled over and went back to sleep. She later described the sound as being as if something had hit the roof like a rubber ball, and then it rolled and hit the ground with a thump. Around 1 a.m., Jeannie Sr. awoke to the smell of smoke that had began to fill their room. She ran from the bedroom in search of its source and found the flames spreading from a corner in her husband's office, which prevented her from reaching the telephone to call for help. Instinctively, she ran back to the bedroom, yelling for her husband to wake up. She then woke up Marian, who was still asleep on the couch, and told her to go grab Sylvia before running to the stairway and screaming for the children who were still upstairs. Jeannie Sr. does recall how she ran to the bottom of the stairs where her children were supposed to be sleeping and yelled when the two oldest boys, John and George Jr., came stumbling down the stairs with their hairs singed with the flames that were now engulfing the house.
What?
So the two oldest boys come down, and John had yelled into the room next door where the other children would have presumably been asleep, and he thought that he heard them answer, like, okay, guys, we gotta go. And I'm presuming he might have thought he heard somebody go, okay, we're getting up, we're coming. This happened before continuing outside to help his brother and his father fight the growing fire. George Sr. did try to rescue the other children by breaking a window and trying to re-enter the house, and while doing so, he actually sliced a swath of skin from his arm.
Oh,
Unfortunately, though, this attempt to get back into the house was in vain, as he couldn't see anything through the billowing smoke and fire now escaping that window because you've added oxygen to the fire. It had swept through the whole entire downstairs part of the house, and he recalls that he could barely see a thing. He had to take stock of what he knew. His wife, Sylvia, Marianne, and himself were all downstairs and had escaped, as well as the two boys, George Jr. and John, who had been upstairs, presumably with their siblings. So he's got at least a good chunk of them out, but there's still 5 inside. Martha, Luis, Maurice, Betty, and Jeannie Jr. were all still upstairs in one of the 2 bedrooms on either side of the staircase, which has now become engulfed in flames, making it impossible for anyone to access the second story from inside the house. So George Sr. races back outside with a plan to use a ladder he'd always kept propped up against the house to reach the upper bedrooms in case of emergencies. However, when he went to grab it, the ladder was gone. So George Sr. now has to go with a different plan, and he decides that he'd use one of his 2 coal trucks, pull it up alongside the house, and use it to climb up and reach the upper windows. George Sr. then instructs John and George Jr. to pull both of the trucks up to the house, and both of the boys go running for the vehicles. Only when they get there, they go to start them, and nothing happens.
weird.
Mind
Very
you,
weird.
they had worked perfectly fine the day before, but now none of them would start. So George Sr. is running low on options. He's obviously panicked and he's ransacking his brain for another idea at this point. And he decides he's going to try to scoop water from one of the rain barrels on the property. But unfortunately, it's December, it gets really cold, and that water is frozen solid. 5 of George Sr.'s children were still inside the house as smoke whipped through the cold December air and the flames rose higher. George Sr. didn't even notice the blood pouring from his arm at this point, and his voice stung from screaming their names.
Oh, I'm sure. I don't think you'd notice. I don't think you'd care.
No.
This reminds me of the one lady that like burnt 90% of her body trying to get her kids out of a fire.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember her name. But yeah, yeah, it's like she said, she's like, I figured I could die once all the kids were out.
Yeah, and like coming from a perspective of, I think Kim and I talked about this on one of the episodes that we covered together. Honest to God, like came swimming up to me, which that's June and James's baby. She came swimming
Okay.
up to me in the lake and she dunked me under because I didn't have a life vest on. Mind you, I can hold my breath pretty long. I'm a swimmer. So she dunked me under and I just kind of like sat there like, I will prop this baby up. If that means I die, I fucking die then. That's fine. At least she's safe.
Mm-hmm.
So during all of this happening at the home, Marion had actually taken off in a sprint to one of the neighbors' home to call the Fayetteville Fire Department. However, when the neighbor tried, they couldn't get a hold of an operator. And this wasn't an isolated incident either. Another neighbor who had seen the blaze and tried to phone the fire department from a nearby tavern also got no response from an operator.
This is getting crazier.
This is getting really crazy and it's gonna
Like,
go
there's no
like
gas in the cars. Someone was thinking, well, they set this whole thing up. There's no way this is just a freak accident.
it's gonna spiral so fucking hard, Sarah, so hold on to your
Hmm.
seat. So this neighbor who had seen the fire and tried to phone from the tavern was exasperated by what was going on. So he got into a vehicle and decided that he was going to track down the fire chief, F.J. Morris, to get this call handled and taken care of. It was a little after 1 a.m. on Christmas Day by the time that they found Morris. And Morris started the Fayetteville's version of a fire alarm, which is a phone tree system where firefighters are called one by one on the phone from another. So it's basically like it trickles down of like, we call this one person, they call two, they go, and it just trickles down. So the chief was also incapable of driving the fire truck. So he had to wait for somebody that could, which I'm like, how are you the chief of the fire department and you don't know how to drive the fire truck? How? How's that work? Additionally, the fire department's staff was depleted at the time because we're coming out of World War II.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Anybody is anybody. It
mm-hmm.
was probably over in World War II.
Yeah. So, firefighters were told that children were still trapped inside by raging flames, but the fire truck didn't arrive until 8 a.m. Christmas morning. That's 7 hours after the fire had started. At this point, the house had been reduced to a smoldering pile of ash. However, this may have mattered very little as the house had burned to the ground after only 30 to 45 minutes since Jeannie Sr. had woken up and discovered the fire.
Too fast.
That is a really fast fire. I'm like, how hot is that
Yeah.
shit burning?
I'm thinking the
What the
gas
fuck?
from the cars was siphoned and thrown up on the roof.
So, all that remained of the Sodder house was a basement now filled with ashes of once was a standing building. So, George Sr. and Jeannie Sr., as parents, began to grieve and assume the worst. 5 of their children were most likely dead due to this fire. On Christmas Day, the grief stricken and injured George Sr. and his 2 oldest sons began to search with the firefighters on scene for any signs of the other 5 children. By 10 a.m., Chief Morris informed them that there was no remains of the children, and it is likely that their bodies had been effectively cremated by the fire. The fire marshal on scene told the Sodder family to leave the site as it was, and he'd be back with authorities to finish inspecting the area later. However, on December 29th, just 4 days after the fire, the Sodders used a bulldozer to fill in the area with presumably 4 to 5 feet of dirt. They then planned to fence in the lot and plant flowers in the area as a memorial for the children that they believed to be resting there. So on December 30th, the death certificates of 5 children were filed, and their cause of death was listed as fire or suffocation. A state police inspector had also made their way out and combed the rubble of the home and attributed the fire to being faulty wiring. This was later concluded with the coroner's inquest that involved a jury coming to a consensus for the fire's cause. So, in the following days, questions began to arise from the Sodder couple. Jeannie Sr. couldn't understand how 5 children could perish in a fire and not leave a single sign. No bones, no flesh, nothing. So she started her own private experiment of burning animal bones to see if a fire would actually consume them, as Chief Morris had stated.
Turns them blue.
Yeah, it would turn them blue, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it does. I talked to a fire marshal about it
I was
when
about
I
to
cut
ask
his
him, like, do
hair.
you speak from experience here, Sarah? So each time that she was doing this experiment, she was left with a heap of charred bones. In addition to this, she also knew that there were various remnants of household appliances that had been found in the burnt out basement, still in identifiable condition. She also reached out to an employee at a local crematorium asking about how long it would take for bones to turn to ash. To which this employee said bones will usually still remain after 2 hours at 2,000 degrees. The house burned in 45 minutes.
Very suspicious.
Now, I went and looked this up myself, mainly because I'm curious, but I also want to verify this claim. So, an average human body takes between 2 to 3 hours to burn completely in a cremation process at a heat of about 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. However, this can obviously differentiate depending on the mass of the body. What will be produced from this process is about 3 to 9 pounds of ash, which is consistent with like flakes and crumbles of bone. So it's not like all the bones would turn completely to dust after the cremation process. There's still remnants, and in many cremation processes, they actually kind of do what I would describe to be like a power wash to kind of break down whatever's left of bone following the cremation process. So it's basically like they brittle it up and then they wash it down afterwards. At some point, Jeannie Sr. had also seen a newspaper article about a nearby 3-story frame house, which had also caught on fire. This fire killed 7 people, including a 3-month-old, and the house had also been burnt to the ground. The remains of all the victims were found charred, albeit, but intact. Another question arose when a telephone repairman that had come to fix the lines told the Sodders that their lines had been cut and not burned, meaning that there's evidence of tampering with their
Tampering.
phone lines. Additionally, George Sr. stated that he'd had the old wiring replaced when they installed the new electric stove in the house. The wire had also undergone inspection and was cited as being all good just days before the fire even happened. So, this leaves the reasoning of faulty wiring given by the inspector now in question, because how can you have a fire start with faulty wiring if the wiring is brand new? Also, if the wiring had been faulty, Jeannie Sr. mentions that the lights would have most likely gone out during the fire, which they didn't. They stayed on for some time as they watched their house burn to the ground. A witness also came forward not long after, stating they'd seen a man at the property with a block and tackle used for removing car engines. And this started the theory as to maybe this is why George Sr.'s trucks didn't start that night.
Yeah.
So, this man apparently later pleaded guilty for stealing a block and tackle, but said that he knew nothing of the fire. He did later confess to cutting the
Convenient.
wires to the house, though, believing them to be power lines. However, these lines were cut 14 feet above the ground and just 2 feet from the utility pole. No one knows what really came of this arrest, and police did not follow up on it. So, and unfortunately, I couldn't find the name of the man that was arrested regarding this. So, he is a mystery to us all. One day, a few months later, after the snow had melted, while the family was visiting the site, Sylvia found a hard rubber object in the yard. That's when Jeannie Sr. remembered hearing the thud on the roof and the rolling that night. George Sr. concluded that the device that Sylvia had found was a napalm pineapple bomb, the type used in warfare at the time. So let's break down
Is it a
napalm real quick.
pineapple?
It
Okay,
kind of looks like
I
a
know what a
pineapple.
napalm is.
It really
Okay.
does kind of look like a pineapple itself. It's like you have the base at the bottom and then it kind of flares at the top a little bit. Obviously, if you want to see what this looks like, you can Google it too. So, running through what napalm is. Napalm is a tactical weapon used to remove vegetative cover or instill fear. It is also called firebomb fuel gel, as it has a very gel like consistency that allows it to stick to its targets. Napalm, once ignited, can burn at more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So, after doing a little bit of math, and mind you, I'm not entirely great at math, but I calculated that with a cremation temperature to this in relation to like burning a human body, it probably would have happened in about 22.23 minutes total. However, like I said, you got to take into consideration of other factors playing a role in here of how fast it's burning versus how a body reacts to that burning. So it's not going
Well,
to be
how
a
much
complete
napalm
science.
was it?
I don't
I
think it.
mean, we probably don't know, but like, let's theorize for a second how much napalm you'd actually need
How much
to burn
napalm you
down
would
a house in
actually need
45 minutes.
to burn down a house in
That's insane.
45 minutes. Well,
That's
considering
insane.
most napalm, like when you do see it depicted in Hollywood or you read about it when you like study genocide, a lot of it comes from flamethrowers, which I mean, that splurts out a good amount of that gel and it's already igniting as it's going. Honestly, I can't speak to the factor of how fast that would take the house to burn down and for it to spread and how that fire is going to react because I don't deal with arson.
That's fair. I know that they use like oxygen molecules or things that combine with oxygen molecules to keep the fire like lit for longer.
Hmm.
But I feel like you need more than just like one little thing of napalm
Yeah.
to get
That's
a whole house.
well, to get a whole house, like once the fire starts spreading, obviously it's gonna keep going. So if you can't, and obviously you can't put out napalm the same way you put out a regular fire, you can't dump water on it. It doesn't work, it keeps burning.
No, that
So
wouldn't even stop it.
it wouldn't even stop it. So, I mean, when you think about how that fire is reacting with the house, if it is napalm gel, you have to take into consideration what the house is made of that time of like year because a lot of it wasn't how it is today where you can have things shipped across the country to build your house. A lot of this is I went into the woods and I chopped these trees down or blah 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 blah, chopped these trees down and built me a house. Is the wood dry? Is it moist? And what's going to happen depending on insulation and things like that that add fuel to
I
a
was also
fire.
thinking, what was it? They were probably using like asbestos in
Yeah,
the house. I don't know how flammable that is. It looks like it's flammable.
it's
Um,
it's nasty. I'll give you that.
insulation did they use? Probably just
I don't
what's
know
it
if
called? The pink
fiberglass
stuff.
was available back then.
Yeah.
It might
Well,
have
they
been.
used to use like blankets and like not in America, but other countries they'd use hair, like human hair and animal hair. Yeah, is insulation.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
No,
It's grubby.
thank you, Ed Gein. God damn, I don't want that shit in my walls.
I looked it up. It was probably mud, horsehair, wool, or straw, or newspaper. Oh, and asbestos.
And asbestos. Baking
And
muffins as
asbestos,
best
most
as I
notably.
can. But obviously, those are things that are flammable in nature, especially straw. Straw is extremely flammable. So
Yeah,
if you've got a
straw,
house fire
paper,
going,
hair.
it's gonna burn like paper. It's just gonna go through everything. And if it's burning hot enough, obviously you're gonna have it spread a lot faster. A bus driver who was working late that evening also said that he saw balls of fire landing on the roof that evening. So, from what I could kind of imagine of this, I would presume it kind of looks like maybe one or two napalm bombs kind of going off, or like a couple like balls of fire like bouncing out of maybe the ignition source. I can't say for sure though, but that's where my imagination goes. Additionally, while the Sodders planted flowers across the space where their house used to be, they began to stitch together a series of odd moments leading up to the fire. A few months earlier, a stranger had shown up at the house asking about hauling work from George Sr.'s company. He then meandered around the back of the house and pointed to two spare fuse boxes, stating, "That's going to cause a fire someday." Then there was another man that came by around that same time, a life insurance salesman, which George Sr. declined the service of, and the individual became very irate and shouted at George, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to pay for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." To which George Sr. was a very outspoken man about his dislike of the Italian dictator, even engaging in heated arguments through Fayetteville's Italian community. George Sr. at this time didn't take that threat seriously, but looking back at it now, maybe it had some validity. Then there was something the older Sodder sons recalled. Just before Christmas, they noticed a man parked along Highway 21, intently watching their younger siblings as they came home from school. Also, the latter, that George Sr. admittedly states in interviews he's given that he kept by the house, was 75 feet away down an embankment away from the house. This began a wave of questions of, are the children actually dead, or were they possibly abducted?
Also terrifying.
So, after this came reports of sightings. A woman claimed to have seen the missing children peering from a passing car while the fire was in progress. Another woman operating a tourist shop between Fayetteville and Charleston, approximately 50 miles west from the home, said she'd seen them that morning after the fire. She told police that she'd served them breakfast and that the car they got out of had Florida license plates. Then a woman at a Charleston hotel saw the children's photos in the newspaper and said she'd seen 4 of the 5 children a week after the fire, and they were accompanied by a woman and 2 men of Italian ethnicity. She didn't remember the exact date that the group had arrived at the hotel, however, and the entire party did register, and the group stayed in one large room with several beds. In that it was around like midnight when they had actually checked into the hotel. She also stated that she attempted to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared very hostile and refused to let her speak to them. One of these men even looked at her in a hostile way and turned around and started talking to the party in Italian. After that, the whole group stopped talking to her. The party then left the next morning. In 1947, George Sr. and Jeannie Sr. reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and received a reply from J. Edgar Hoover himself. Although I would like to be of service, the manner related appears to be one of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of the Bureau. Following up that he'd reach out and see if he can be of any assistance to the local authorities. However, Fayetteville's police and fire departments declined this offer. The Sodders then turned to a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley, who actually discovered that the insurance man who'd visited the Sodders and threatened George at the time was a member of the coroner's jury that deemed the fire to be accidental. He also heard an interesting story from a Fayetteville minister about Chief Morris. Although the chief had claimed that there were no remains found on the property, he supposedly confessed that he discovered a heart in the ashes and hid it inside a dynamite box, which was buried at the scene. Tinsley persuaded Morris to show him the spot where it was buried and took it to a local funeral director who poked and prodded at it for a moment before confirming this is a beef's liver, not a heart. And
I
mind
shouldn't
you,
laugh.
it's completely untouched by the fire.
Okay.
The Sodder families began to hear rumors on how the box had not been found in the fire at all. And in fact, the beef liver was buried in the rubble by Morris at a later date, hoping that in the event that it was found, it would ease the family enough to stop the investigation under the reason that remains had been found. Also to note, beef liver and a human heart look nothing fucking alike.
All right then. Like,
They
I
don't
don't
look
really know what
anything
to say about all that.
they don't look anything alike. I'm like, you really
No,
think
but
that by burying a beef liver in a dynamite box at a arson scene is gonna make people go, oh, my children are at peace? I'd be like, what the fuck is this doing here?
the box.
What's in the box?
Jesus.
So, over the years, new tips and leads would surface. George even saw a newspaper photo of school children in New York City and was convinced one of them was his daughter, Betty. He drove to Manhattan in search of his child, however, the parents refused to speak with him. In August of 1949, the Sodders decided to mount a new search of the fire scene, bringing in Washington, D.C. pathologist Oscar B. Hunter. This excavation uncovered several small objects, damaged coins, a partially burnt dictionary, and several shards of vertebrae. Now, the bones were sent to the Smithsonian Institution, and the report that came back is as followed. The human bones consisted of 4 lumbar vertebrae belonging to one individual. Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death would have been around 16 to 17 years old. The top limit of age would be around 22, since the centra, which is normally fused at 23, is still unfused. On this basis, the bones show greater skeletal maturity than one would expect of a 14-year-old boy. However, it's possible, although not likely probable, for a 14-and-a-half-year-old boy to show maturity signs of a 16 to 17-year-old. So they're looking at this and they're taking the oldest missing Sodder boy to possibly be the remains of him. However, as I said, these bones are far more matured than what you would expect to see at a 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So this was considered odd, as if there were smaller human bones here, wouldn't you expect to find a full skeleton rather than just a couple of vertebral columns? So these bones are theorized to have come from a supply of dirt that George Sr. used to fill the basement and create the memorial for his children. So wherever he was digging up is likely where those remains came from, and they are likely ancient and not present remains at the time. So
Very
this
suspicious.
it's suspicious, but I mean, if you think about like where and living in the South now and knowing kind of the layout of how things are and just how many cemeteries there are, you have to take into consideration that there's a lot of old stuff that happened over here, and like West Virginia is one of those states that's been around for quite some time. So it's wars being fought. You have Native Americans that are dying, and you have people that are perishing on the Oregon Trail or anything else that they're traveling on to get to the west. You're obviously going to see some remains in areas that you wouldn't really expect to. This report did prompt 2 hearings at the capital of Charleston, after which Governor Oakley L. Patterson and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett told the Sodders that the search was hopeless and declared the case closed. In 1952, the Sodders purchased a billboard, and it featured a black and white photograph of each of the children, as well as an account of the fire. It also offered a reward of $5,000 for information leading to the recovery of any or all of the children. And for years, people would pull over and walk up to read the sign. The billboard did lead to a few new rumors, one being that the children had been sold to an orphanage, another stating that they had been taken to Italy, and some even suggested that the mafia may have been involved.
A little bit like the mafia.
It does sound a little bit like the
Teeny bit.
mafia. So in 1968, more than 20 years after the fire, Jeannie Sr. received an envelope in the mail addressed only to her. It was postmarked Kentucky with no return address. Inside was the photo of a man in his mid-20s, and on the flip side of it was a cryptic handwritten message that read, Luis Sodder, I love my brother Frankie, little boys. A90132, or the last 2 numbers could have possibly been 35. Jeannie Sr. and George Sr. couldn't deny that the young man bore a striking resemblance to their Luis, who was only 9 at the time of the fire. A private detective was hired and sent to follow up on this letter in Kentucky, but they never heard from him again. For the rest of his life, George Sodder Sr. traveled the country looking for and tracking down rumors of his missing children. He died in 1969, and his wife Jeannie Sr. followed in 1979. After her death, the billboard was taken down. Sylvia Sodder, the youngest child, passed on April 21st of 2021. Her wish was to keep her family's story alive. So every Christmas, the people in Fayetteville recount the events of what happened that night to the Sodder family. And unfortunately, that's where it ends.
No. That's so crazy. But it would be so hard to find your kids back then. Like, there are no paper trails.
Yeah, it's. I don't even know where to begin with some cases that I look at today. Like, things that happen today still tend to be one of those things that's like, yeah, you have a cell phone. You have a little bit of a paper trail to go by if somebody's not being smart with their kidnapping or their abduction techniques, which I hate to say smart, but you have to take into consideration we've got a lot of ways to kind of keep tabs on a person, and it still happens to this day that people disappear without a fucking trace, never to be seen again. And for that to happen in the 1940s, I believe, where you don't have cell phones, you don't have a regular communication method with the people that you love, you don't have that direct reach to be like, hey, are you okay? And then to put into perspective as well, this isn't like they're walking down the street and they got abducted. This is they're at home, it's Christmas Eve. The family is celebrating, getting ready to settle down for the night, and suddenly there's a fucking fire.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the amount of hate that somebody must have had against this family is atrocious. To do this to them on Christmas Eve. You not only took their house, you took 5 of their fucking children.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there's really not much more to go on. I don't even think there's a tip line for this. If I was going through stuff, I don't think I saw it and it didn't come up because it's so old. But recounting the information of what happened that evening, and I mean, there is possibility that somewhere down the line, somebody going through genealogical testing might pop up as being one of their great grandkids or possibly somebody else, and like linking back to it and being like, hey, this is where one of them went. But I mean, that's really like a needle in a haystack at this point.
That'd be really slim anyway,
Mm-hmm.
since, no actual DNA except for the suspicious liver
The
and
suspicious
bones.
liver.
Yes.
Well, if you think about it, if you look back at like Italian descendancies and if you look at ancestry like DNA and things like that, I'm not really sure how all that works as far as like you have DNA that relates to you back to the Roman Empire. I don't know how they do that without having DNA samples from people that were part of the Roman Empire, which at that point it's like how degraded is that DNA and how accurate is that test. However, when we look
Mm-hmm.
at genealogical DNA testing nowadays with Othram, for instance, they have literally given people their names back from the 1800s. It's incredible what they do. So, if anyone could do it and solve this mystery, it would probably be Othram. Unfortunately, I'm not a DNA expert. I'm nowhere close. Genealogical stuff, not my forte. Don't really understand it. Anyways, though, unfortunately, guys, I don't have any numbers for you for this case. It is, I want to say, almost 80 years old at this point. A lot of the people that were involved have probably passed at this point as well, and the department didn't wish to investigate it any further. But it is a way to keep their memories alive and keep that story going. And who knows, maybe one day there might be some answers to this. However, as of right now, there are none. And I'm sorry to leave you with that. Thank you again for listening to Spattered. Please make sure to follow the show on Facebook and Instagram at Spattered Podcast and on X at Spattered Pod. If you're enjoying the show, make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you're watching on YouTube, like this video, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to be notified when the show goes live or drops a video. As always, if you have a case request, any questions, or are interested in sponsoring the show, please email me at spatteredpodcast@gmail.com. Spattered is a true crime podcast hosted by Caitlin Gardner and Sarah Ray. The research and edits for this episode were done by Caitlin Gardner. All the music for the show was done by Lucio Cardenas. We'll see you next time. Stay safe out there. And remember, the truth is always in the blood.